Welcome to Broad Eye, the podcast that explores knowledge gaps in ophthalmology and eye care.
Welcome everyone to another episode of the Broad Eye podcast. I'm Dr. Bruno Fernandez, and today I have the pleasure of having Dr. Jay Duker, Chief Operating Officer at EyePoint Pharmaceutical with us. How's it going, Jay?
It's going very well, Bruno. Thanks for allowing me to do this.
Thank you for accepting our invite. I'm excited about our talk today, and there are some points of your career path that kind of resonate with me, so I'm particularly excited about what you're going to share. So you're obviously a renowned ophthalmologist and had a very successful career as a clinician, researcher, surgeon, and now you hold an executive position at the pharma industry. So we're going to cover everything point by point, but kind of like walk us through, like, I mean, your beginnings and
So Bruno, I think 30 years ago when I entered practice, if you had told me I was going to end up in a position like this, I wouldn't have believed it. But, life is funny. And I think that sometimes opportunities present themselves and our careers head in a little different direction because of that. And I think my career over 30 odd years has really been an example of that. I trained at Wills Eye Hospital, both residency and fellowship. And my wife is from the Boston area, so she didn't give me a lot of choices when it came to finding a job. So we came up to Boston, and I joined a private practice for a year and a half, which was an interesting experience. But fortunately, after some period of time, the Department of Ophthalmology at Tufts decided to expand, and I got recruited to be the head of retina at a relatively young age over at Tufts. And I went over there and it was a very exciting time. There were 4 or 5 of us at the beginning, mostly young.
How old were you when you assumed that position?
32, 33.
That's very early.
Yeah, and so the interesting thing there is that the department was growing and that it was a very clinically based department at the time, but Carmen Pulifido and Joel Schumann were other members of the department, and they had this very interesting device called OCT that had just been invented at MIT. In the first unit, very soon in my career, was brought over to our eye center, and they allowed me to get involved in the research, and that's what really spawned my research interests. At the same time, I had been interested in drug delivery to the eye, and just coincidentally, the doctor who helped to invent the technology that I'm dealing with now at EyePoint worked down the hall from me, and they had a drug release device that was being developed for CMV retinitis that was called the DEXYCU implant. And I was fortunate to be one of the initial investigators on the DEXYCU implant right around the same time. And I ended up, I think I was the second person in the world to put one in, and I ended up putting in more than anybody else. But interestingly, how this happens, I knew about EyePoint's technology when it first started over 25 years ago, and it's similar technology to what we're doing now. After Dr. Pulifido left to go to be the chair at Bascom Palmer, I was interim chair and then became permanent chair, and had been chair for 21 years at Tufts. And it was a great run. It really was a terrific part of my career. But starting many years ago, I became more involved in some industry things. Some of my colleagues and I started a company called Humira Biosciences, which was a gene therapy drug delivery company for dry macular degeneration. And that helped to really prompt my interest in the industry aspects and drug development aspects of a career. And I think I reached a point where many people do, where they look at the career, they look forward and they look back and they say, do I want to continue doing this for forever? And at my age, I decided it was time to take on a new challenge. And I thought, trying something more directly in industry would be that type of new challenge. And as a result, I, decided, starting really about 2 years ago when I became a part-time employee of EyePoint, and finally about 6 months ago when I became a full-time employee, to really have a shift in my career. And so far, it's been terrific. I think, when you deal with people, It's the same whether you're running a Department of Ophthalmology or you're the chief operating officer of a biotech company. But the challenges are similar, but also different, and the timelines are very different. Bruno, as a retina specialist, I think you know this too. We go to the operating room and we try to fix something, retinal detachment or macular hole. Takes us half hour or an hour, and we either fix it or we don't. The timelines in industry, it's not like you're not busy every day. You're very busy, but the timelines are longer. Clinical trials can take years to get results. And so ultimately you're doing drug development, but it takes quite a number of months or years to ultimately know whether your pathway's been the right one.
Yeah, and I had the chance to chat a bit with other physicians that did that transition to like non-attending career, if you can put it that way, and like myself included. And one common ground that I found was that the motivation, it's more like an extension of like taking care of patients instead of replacing with something else, so we're not becoming bureaucrats, right? Like, it's just that like we figured out a way to do more good to more patients, instead of like one by one, I guess.
Exactly. But I think researchers in general have understood that from the start, is whether you're running a laboratory or you're running a biotech company, or you're involved in clinical trials, you're trying to do good for a large population, perhaps in a small way. But again, for me, it was time for a new challenge. I had done the academic aspects of things for many years. I think I advanced our department greatly in a lot of ways. But at some point, we all stepped down, and it's better off to do it under the circumstances of our own control than not. So yeah, I'm still fortunate to EyePoint's allowing me to see patients 1 day a week, at least for now. And so I still have a clinical practice, and I'm still involved in that.
Yeah, that would be my next question, if you still have any clinical practice at all.
I do. I'm not doing surgery anymore. You really can't do surgery part-time, I don't think. I mean, you're either all in or you're not. But I'm seeing, medical retina patients. I still do some ocular oncology and a little uveitis, and it's been great. It's actually, in some ways, much more relaxing to be able to see patients and not have all those other responsibilities of running the department, superimposed at the same time.
And do you think that, like, seeing patients, it fulfills only your continues to fulfill, obviously, your call to be a doctor, or does that also makes you a better executive in the pharma industry by continue to be in tune with our patients' needs?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think if EyePoint wasn't working in the retinal area, then it would be a stretch to say that. But because what we're trying to develop really is, at this point, long-term drug delivery of an anti-VEGF agent, being able to see these patients on a regular basis and listen to them and look at their needs and observe how our past drugs and our new drugs for this condition are working, I think is extraordinarily helpful. Now, if I were the COO of a cancer company, then perhaps I wouldn't be answering it the same way.
Yeah, no, that's true. And you mentioned, being in tune with patients' needs, and looking at the pipeline for EyePoint Pharmaceuticals, I see a common theme there, which is to reduce the burden of ophthalmological treatments. And one common thing that I see nowadays, and it seems to be a trend, is that drugs are there, but patients are not using, right, for a variety of reasons. Yep. And then is it like the mission of the company, or?
Yeah, it really is. It really is the mission. And so what we have is a very unique drug delivery system called Durasert. And as I mentioned already, it's been around for a while, but our scientists have been able to amend the former iteration of Durasert to make it bioerodible. Previously, with the YUTIQ implant, which we still manufacture and have commercialized, and the DEXYCU implant, and Alimera's implant is actually the same technology for diabetic macular edema. All these implants have a non-erodible polyamide shell around the core of the drug. We've been able to take away that polyamide shell and make the implants, completely bioerodible within the eye. So what we've done is put a small molecule tyrosine kinase inhibitor called vorolanib into these bioerodible Duraserts with the intention of trying to have an anti-VEGF agent that will last 6 months to perhaps even 9 months inside the eye to allow patients to, we hope, to go longer between visits and longer between injections, which has been a goal of the industry for 15 years since we started with the anti-VEGF agents.
And to put into context and maybe simplify things a bit, because we have a lot of patients in our audience also. So that new drug being developed aims to treat neovascular AMD, and then the goal on reducing the burden would be to reduce the number of injections from once a month to once, twice a year.
Yes, hopefully. But the way to look at this is this is a paradigm shift for patients, practitioners, in drug development as well. Previously, we had an anti-VEGF agent. The first one was Macugen, and then Avastin and Lucentis and Eylea all came along. And what each successive drug offered was not necessarily a better visual acuity outcome, but longer durability, so that patients didn't have to be injected quite so often. And it was in a sense, a replacement. The new one replaced the old one. That's not what we're trying to do at EyePoint. We're not trying to replace Eylea or faricimab necessarily, but work with them so that we can get the best outcomes. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, based on our phase 1 trial, we think perhaps 50% or maybe even more wet AMD patients might be able to go up to 6 months using our implant, which we call EYP-1901, using it alone. Now, that's great, but if you say, well, 50%, what about the other 50%? Well, I say, well, two things. First of all, if we know which eyes do best with the implant, then the individual physician's success rate with the implant is going to be greater than 50%. In other words, if we learn from our studies and we can identify the eyes ahead of time, they're the ones that are going to go 6 months, as are the eyes that we're going to treat. But even if you look at our phase 1 data and you look at the eyes that required supplemental anti-VEGF treatment before 6 months, what we call the treatment burden was markedly reduced in those eyes. So what I mean by that is some of those eyes were getting treated monthly or every 6 weeks with an anti-VEGF agent. We gave them EYP-1901, and maybe at month 4, month 5, they required a supplemental injection with another anti-VEGF. But most of those eyes then continued another 4 or 5 months without another supplemental injection. So they went from injections every 6 weeks to injections every 3 to 4 months. So what my point is that we don't have to work every 6 months on every patient, because we also appear to be able to reduce the treatment burden significantly in a large percentage of other eyes. Now, there'll always be patients who don't necessarily respond to a treatment. And we have eyes who required still, injections of supplement every month or 2 in this study. And that's fine, again, as long as we can identify them. But I'd also argue, since patients miss visits, the idea of having an anti-VEGF agent on board as a baseline treatment in an eye that's going to last 6 to 9 months will give the clinicians and the patients, I think, confidence that even if they do miss a visit or 2, that they still have some treatment on board. And the last point I want to make is our mechanism of action is different than the FDA-approved agents. The FDA-approved agents all work at the ligand level by blocking the ligand. We work at the receptor level. And so theoretically, having 2 mechanisms of action, even using both together, may be benefit to patients.
Yeah, so I guess having this device, if we can call it that way, inside the eye, it will, in a way, assures that the peaks and valleys, the valleys between injections, wouldn't be so low, right? So
Exactly.
so the the anti-VEGF levels
Exactly.
inside the eye will never follow.
Exactly, and so that the term that's used with the drug release, Bruno, is called zero order kinetics, and that was a unique aspect of the Durasert technology. After an initial burst, because there's some drug on the surface of the implant where you get relatively high levels in the first few weeks, these bioerodible Durasert implants go into what's called zero order kinetics. So they just release, every minute of every day, every month for 6 to 9 months until the medication runs out at a stable dose. This type of microdosing, at least theoretically, would allow better control. And I think we've got some evidence of that with our YUTIQ implant. The YUTIQ implant is a tiny dose of fluocinolone, which is a corticosteroid. But for 60% of patients with posterior segment uveitis, if you put in a YUTIQ implant, they can go 3 years with no recurrences. 3 years with one injection. And so that's the power of the microdosing with zero order kinetics is shown in those patients. And we hope to have a similar outcome with the wet AMD patients as well.
And talking about the device itself, I mean, the device might be not be the best like choice of wording. Like, so there are other implants out there, and like some are an actual hardware, right? I mean, that stays there,
Right.
and the drug is inserted, and Durasert's not, right? Like, I mean, is it completely absorbed by the eye?
It should be, yes. And so that, again, Durasert is injected in the office, local anesthesia like any other injection. In our phase 2 wet AMD trial, the inserts will be injected with a 22 gauge needle, which is a similar gauge to, for example, the Ozurdex implant, which most retinal clinicians have used extensively. And we're able to deliver up to 3 inserts with a single injection, which is a little bit unique. So for our wet AMD phase 2 trial, our low dose is 2 milligrams, which is 2 inserts, single injection, and the high dose is 3 milligrams, 3 inserts, single injection. And these inserts should fully biodegrade. The majority of the insert is drug, and the other excipients, at least in the laboratory, do fully biodegrade. And we haven't observed it yet in the human eye. And part of the problem is the inserts are very hard to photograph. Once they go in, they sink to the bottom of the eye, typically, and even wide field photographs, our investigators are having a hard time taking pictures of them. And what happens is the inserts look yellow when they first go in because the vorolanib, that's the color of the vorolanib. And when the vorolanib goes away, the inserts are clear, and they're tiny little bits of the excipients left before they fully reabsorb, and they're actually been difficult to photograph. So at least in the laboratory, they fully dissipate.
And the fact that they're difficult to photograph might also mean this. I mean, might actually be a good thing, because that might also means that the patient, that doesn't bother the patient's vision
exactly
that much.
Oh, so it's a typical good news, bad news. Difficult to photograph, so we have hard time looking at their rate of dissolution in the human eye. On the other hand, that's exactly right. We're a little less concerned that patients will be bothered by them. None of the patients in the phase 1 trial, although the number was low, 17 eyes, none of the patients were aware of the implants. None of them complained of floaters. And so if that continues, obviously with the other trials, it'll be a good thing.
And you mentioned that there's the opportunity to inject like more than one insert, like in the eye. So does that give the option of like customizing doses for individual patients, so it's not like a one size fits all sort of thing?
It potentially could be that. And so there are some technical issues around customization, and also issues around packaging, and of course things like billing, and those are important to physicians and the insurance companies. So as you may be aware, you can't do 2 anti-VEGF injections within 28 days of each other. And so that if you wanted to do multiple inserts, you would have to separate them by that time frame. But these are issues that ultimately, what's best for the patient and what gives the best visual results, that's what we're going to do. The other thing about multiple inserts is not just customization of a single drug, but it does bring up the option of using multiple drugs and multiple pathways. And again, we use an example here of faricimab, which just got FDA approved, and it blocks both VEGF and Ang2. And in our pipeline, we are working on Tie2 agonists and perhaps using them in Durasert if possible. And the idea of perhaps using them coupled in a single injection with an anti-VEGF agent, that might be something that will prove to be safe and effective in the future. So that's one of the pipeline things that I'm very excited about that EyePoint is working on.
So the Durasert can virtually be used with like any drug?
No, the short answer is it can't. Durasert is very good at delivering corticosteroids and small molecules. So antibodies and antibody fragments are basically too large at this point to work in Durasert. We're exploring other alternatives as a company for large molecule delivery, but the current iteration of Durasert, you really have to have smaller molecules. And there are other features of the drug that have to be right, including the solubility and things like that. So no, the quick answer is you can't put any drug into Durasert. That would be terrific if you could, but we're limited to certain characteristics.
All right. Changing a bit, but still staying within the same theme of having sustained release devices and decreasing the burden of continuous treatment. I'd like to talk a bit about the DEXYCU. So it is a little different, right? Because you're not actually injecting like a device inside the eye. It's like a aqueous or suspension that you inject using like a normal intravitreal injection.
Yes. So DEXYCU is actually a different technology that we obtained. It's the Verisome technology, and it is a short-acting corticosteroid that basically goes in as this tiny little droplet, and it's used post-surgical for reducing post-surgical inflammation. And it's most commonly used at the end of cataract surgery, although technically it could be used at the end of any intraocular surgery. And the idea is to replace the topical corticosteroid drops. And it's inserted into the posterior capsule at the end of cataract surgery, dissolves typically over a period of weeks, and really provides excellent anti-inflammatory coverage for these post-surgical eyes. So the Verisome technology is versatile, and it's possible that type of technology might be useful for other drugs other than steroids, which again is something that we are internally studying here at EyePoint to see if it makes sense to use that technology for other drugs and perhaps for posterior segment delivery.
How does that replace like eye drops in terms of like a frequency of use?
Well, for the vast majority of patients who get DEXYCU, they don't need corticosteroid eye drops after surgery. So their surgeon may still choose to give them antibiotic drops. Some do, some don't. They may choose to go completely dropless and just use the DEXYCU and not even use a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug. But again, it's a patient compliance thing. Using those drops for elderly patients is difficult 4 times a day for several weeks, and we know that they're not always compliant in doing it. And this way, the doctor is completely in control of the drug delivery, and they know that the patient's going to get it.
Yeah, I actually read a paper recently that 90% of patients after cataract surgery do not use their steroid drops like the way they should.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, and so we know those kind of statistics from glaucoma and other areas as well. And having the doctor in control of the drug delivery certainly has advantages. And I think that's one of the things that's a hallmark of the anti-VEGF era, which is we retina specialists deliver the anti-VEGFs to the back of the eye, so we know the patient's getting them. The downside has been not efficacy or certainly not safety. It's the fact that they have to be delivered so frequently. That's really the downside.
Indeed. Jay, enough of science a bit. Look, I'm I would like to talk a bit more about your role at EyePoint, particularly because like most doctors when they join a boardroom and they or the C-suite, in your case, they usually become chief medical officers or like a medical director, and then but you're a COO, which
Yes.
has a much more like managerial responsibility than a CMO, I would guess. And so my question is like how different it is, like I mean, to be a COO compared to a CMO.
The answer is I don't know. I've never been a CMO, but we have an excellent CMO here, Dr. Dario Paggiarino. And Dario is just fantastic, and he and I work very well together. And so that EyePoint didn't need a CMO. We had an excellent one. But from an operational perspective, a lot of what I did as chair Tufts was really operational things. As they say, making the trains run on time, making the clinic work well, keeping the doctors happy, keeping the staff happy. And those kind of operational aspects, some of them are very similar at any company. Good communication, communicating decisions, making decisions, with the right people in the room and getting the decisions made in a certain period of time, and tying in the financial aspects of things so that the finance people know what the clinical decisions are and when then when the clinical trials are going to occur so they can, do the budgeting appropriately. It's really, kind of those big picture things that frankly had a lot of overlap of what I was doing before. So I would say maybe it's a little unusual, but I think from my skill set and my interests, chief operating officer really fits in quite well. In saying that, obviously, because I'm a practicing retina specialist, I've had a lot of experience with developing drugs from a clinician's perspective. I do have that to add here at EyePoint, but there are other aspects of things, and most of us clinicians don't really know how complicated things like manufacturing, commercialization, regulatory issues dealing with the FDA. You really need to have very subspecialized people within your organization who know how to do that well. And so fortunately, again, we've got a lot of those people here at EyePoint who are really, really good at what they do. And so those are aspects which, as a clinician, we would only have, touched on lightly in our careers. And fortunately, I'm learning a lot, but we have really good people here who know how to do those tasks.
Yeah, so it seems that your training to become a COO started way before you joined EyePoint, right? Like managing other institutions and clinics.
Absolutely. And so some might say it's a nature versus nurture thing too. You've got to enjoy doing these things, otherwise you don't do them. And so I have enjoyed in the past operational aspects of things and having a plan for moving something forward, whether it's a satellite office or a new ambulatory surgery center or hiring a new doctor, and then watching the plan work and giving the new doctor or the new satellite all the chances to be successful. So again, the goals may be different in biotech, but the idea of having long-term plans and putting the people and the financing and everything else into place to make them successful, it's been the same.
Yeah, and because it like that sometimes comes as a surprise, right? Like for a pure clinician or a researcher, that to bring a successful drug to market, it takes more than just having a drug that actually works in the lab, right? Like
yes.
There's so many moving pieces there that to get just put it all together.
Yeah, Bruno, until you kind of lift up the hood and look at the engine, you have no idea how complicated it is. So yeah, but that's part of the challenge. And one of the things I really like about my new position is it is a new challenge, and it's very complicated. You can't understand everything, but again, as a COO, I don't need to to know how the carburetor works because I've got a really good mechanic here who fixes carburetors. I just got to allow them to do their job successfully, using that under the hood analogy. But it is really complicated. And you know, we all had that experience where we might have joined a phase 3 trial and we looked at the protocol and we said, oh, why did the company choose to set the protocol this way? Well, we have no idea about the thought processes that go into each of those decisions, and they really, really are extensive. And the whole background behind getting to a phase 3 program and developing the protocol for the phase 3 program is quite complex.
I can only imagine. Coming to a wrap here, because I really want to be mindful of your time. I know how busy you are. If you can wrap our chat with maybe a piece of advice, you know, for someone that did that transition successfully, you know, like, so a word to maybe like young doctors that are considering like putting their feet into the industry, or be it like joining an established company, or maybe starting, joining a startup, or, I mean, what would it take, like, I mean, for them to do the transition successfully in terms of like training? Because I mean, they might be a doctor, they have residency, subspecialization, and so on. Do they need an MBA? Like, so what kind of training would be needed, like, I mean, for them to?
Yeah, it's Bruno, it's a great question, and I think the answer is really complicated and not a one size fits all. You know, the first thing I'd say is being a retina specialist is a really, really good job. In that, for in a lot of ways, you can look at what we do and how we help patients, and we get to operate, and we get to, you know, make diagnoses in the clinic and work with people over the long term. You know, there aren't a lot of jobs around that are going to give you more satisfaction than that. So one of the things you have to think about if you're thinking about another career is the answer why. Is that what excites you about drug development, or working in a pharma industry that you're not going to get in your current career? And then the question, of course, is how to prepare for it. That's really hard because in some ways, what you do day to day in the pharma industry is very different than what you do day to day as a physician. And the ability to understand the complexity of things is not something that you necessarily know you're going to be good at, or you know, can do overnight. I think the easiest way for most people in our field to try to do that is try to get involved with clinical trials, and try to get involved with a variety of companies, not just very large pharma companies that are, you know, in phase 3, but even some smaller companies who are just kind of starting out and they're looking for advice and they're looking for help with designing the trials, and see if you enjoy that, and see if you have the ability to kind of look at the broader picture. As you say, Bruno, it's not just, you know, getting a drug approved. All the things that go into it are really complicated, and see if you've got a propensity to help understand that process. Making the leap is hard, though. And again, I guess maybe it was easier for me because I had a background with the technology. I'd been on the board of EyePoint for 4 years before I joined, so I knew the company well. But I think by doing that, by having a diligence into the company that you're going to join, I think that's really important. And for the most part, the diligence is really two things. It's the people and it's the product. And you have to work with people that you trust and you like, and you share a philosophy. And you have to believe in the product. Now, sometimes when the product's early, it's hard to know if you can believe in it or not, but at least the mission. What are they trying to do? Is this something that excites me? Those are, at a high level, those are the two big things. It's the people and the
Indeed.
product.
And also, like, I mean, just to summarize, like, the advice you gave, it's like that leap, like, doesn't need to be that abrupt, right? It can be gradual, and then they can realize if that's what they really want before. Like, I mean,
exactly. At some point, you do take the leap, but yes, you can dip your toe into the water and wade out a little bit at times. But then I think that once you've waded out into the water and you say, I'm going to try it, then those two aspects, the two P's, the people and the product, that's really what you want to look for.
Great. Jay, didn't disappoint. Like, I mean, I really liked like having that chat with you. Thank you very much, like for giving a bit of your valuable time, like coming to us, and I'm sure our audience will enjoy as well.
Bruno, thank you very much for having me. It's been fun. Talk to you soon.
All right. Have a good one.
And that concludes today's episode of the Broad Eye Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Of course, ratings and reviews are always welcome. And you can certainly share this episode with any of your colleagues or friends who might enjoy it. Thanks for listening.